Today on the Transplant Helper, we pause once again to talk about your Social Security and disability benefits, how to receive them, maybe even on the very first try. Let's see what we come up with. Stay tuned. Well, hey folks, I appreciate you joining me again today on the Transplant Helper podcast / YouTube video series. My name is Jim Merle. Now, if you've been watching this series for very long, you might remember back on several months ago, I made a video implying that there was a way or a secret way that you might receive your Social Security benefits and or disability on the very first try. And I'll tell you right now, I stand behind that video 100%. If you'll apply that secret to your application, you'll do much better, and the chances of receiving those benefits on the first try are going to be greatly improved. As a matter of fact, for me, it worked, and for many others who've tried it, it worked for them too. So if you've not already seen that video, I'll try to link it now up here in the corner, as well as in the show notes below this video, so that you can go back and view that in your own time. Now, with that said, we're continuing that discussion today as we've kind of made a series out of this over a period of time at least in discussing your Social Security benefits. As a matter of fact, just last week, I made an additional video to that, which had more to do with when to apply for those benefits. How do you know when the time is right to apply for your Social Security and or disability benefits? Because that really matters. If we miss the mark on that, especially us as transplant patients or those who are waiting on transplant in that case, we might miss the mark altogether and not ever have the chance to receive those benefits because our lives may not last long enough to do that. And that's a sad case, but it's the honest truth. And so I wanted to give you those tips to help you along the way with that. Now, if you've already watched that video, that's fine. If not, I'll give you a quick review in that. We basically just talked about 3 points, and that was to understand that we need to keep in mind our past, our present, and our potential. That is our past medical history, our present condition today as we live, and the potential for what's the outlook of our life if we get those Social Security benefits or not, because it's the case that we may not all receive them. Now, let me say before I go any farther than that, as a disclaimer, that I'm not ever working to try to get anyone to receive any benefit that they do not deserve. So if you're just trying to watch this series of videos to try to mooch off the system and to get your benefits and to reach out and grab some disability you don't deserve, stop. Watch somebody else's videos, get off of mine, because I don't need you viewing my videos that badly. But if you're here for a legitimate purpose, there's a need, and you can prove it with medical history, then today's video is just for you. And as a matter of fact, that's what we're doing today. We're taking what we talked about on last week concerning when to get those benefits, and we're taking that first point concerning our pasts, and we're breaking it down, developing that, and expanding that just a little bit so that we can better understand how to get those past history, those records, medical records particularly, in order. So without any further ado, let's jump right in. It is extremely important that before you jump out there, go ahead down to the Social Security Benefits office or get online and fill out that disability application, that you make sure that you have some sort of medical history that backs up that potential decision they're going to try to make, that you have some sort of medical history that proves, if you will, your case. Because again, this is something you're trying to do out of honesty and sincerity, and it's something that ought to be provable. And so that's the first way we want to discuss this. I'm going to give you several words, maybe 3 or 4, depending on our time here, but they're all going to begin with the letter I. And these are words you don't want to hear when it comes to your case. Number 1, you don't want to hear the word inconclusive. And what I mean by that is when you file for Social Security disability, say you filled out that application today, and in a few weeks you heard back from it, or a few months, you don't want to hear the word inconclusive. Now, what would it be implied in that is that you don't have the medical history to back this up. And then you don't want to hear the Social Security Administration telling you, you know what, we checked out all your records, we gathered your medical records, we looked and reviewed at your application, we did all this work that we're supposed to do, but it's inconclusive. That is, we don't know why you're applying. We don't know why you want these benefits because there's nothing to prove your case. Now, I hope that you would never hear that, especially if, again, you're a legitimate and honest and sincere case, and especially if you're a potential transplant case. certainly probably are going to deserve them. If not for full-time, 100% long-term disability, at least for short-term, I hope that you'd be able to access that. But you don't want to hear the word inconclusive. Again, implying there's just not a conclusion. They're not really trying to grant or deny those benefits, but because they don't have conclusive information, they would call you inconclusive, implying it's ultimately the same thing as a denial. So you're out of luck. No benefit for you. So don't hear the word inconclusive. Number two, you don't want to hear the word come out of their mouths or out of their pens or typing document that the documents were inaccessible. Now, oftentimes this can occur because in the process, it's just too early. I'll give you an example. We'll try to follow this illustration on throughout the rest of our discussion. Let's imagine that John or Jane Doe, whichever one you might be, let's imagine that John or Jane Doe has had a major heart attack. Now, obviously, you may have had some other condition that would lead to this, but imagine John or Jane Doe, that would be you, have had a major heart attack. Imagine that occurred back on June the 3rd of last year. So on June the 3rd of last year, you had a major heart attack. You go into the ER, they do blood work, they do several different tests. They come back without a shadow of a doubt, you've had a major heart attack, and the doctor suggests to you right then, I don't think it's safe for you to go back to work. As a matter of fact, they suggest to you that you ought to apply for your Social Security and disability benefit. And so you hear that, and you're scared to death anyway. So immediately you say, yeah, that's what I need to do. So from June the 3rd to July the 3rd, so for about a month span in there, you work hard and you eventually get that application filled out and you've applied for those benefits. So in 1 month period, you've gone about, found out you've had this heart attack, and now you've already applied for the benefit. Now that has happened before, and that could be the case with you. Now, what could happen in that period of time, just a month, is that they could declare your case inaccessible. And that is that there's not enough information there. It's too early to know. And now, why might that be? Well, again, if you've just gone in the emergency room being diagnosed with that heart attack, even though it's left you debilitated, even though it's left you unable to work, and you know that physically, the doctors know that from talking to you, from seeing your case, it makes no difference to them if when they reach out to those medical facilities, to the emergency room, to the clinics, to the hospitals, if they can't yet gain those medical records. You may have kind of in a way jumped the gun and applied for disability so soon that there's just not substantial record there yet to prove your case. Now, it may not be based on the fact that you applied in a month instead of 3 or in a month instead of 6. It may not really be a time thing. It just simply may be the fact that, I'll tell you a secret, hospitals, they don't work that hard to get things together sometimes. At least that's the way I see it. They just don't have their ducks in a row sometimes. And maybe those records were hard to get. You know, they had to gather records from several sources and resources. Maybe they just weren't all there. So maybe it's inaccessible. You don't want to hear that. So you don't need to jump on this, if you will, too early. Now, you have to be aggressive at times. Your sickness could be one that's going downhill fast, but don't jump too early. Number next, not only inconclusive or inaccessible, but what about being insufficient? Again, let's use John or Jane Doe that had the heart attack back on June the 3rd. By July the 3rd, you or they have already applied for their benefit. But what if the documents there, the history, the medical records, and all these things are gathered up, but they're insufficient? What does that mean? It could mean that proper testing's not yet been done. You know, I agree that you can go into the emergency room and based on blood work, nearby blood work alone, but blood work and maybe a stress test or some other lesser invasive testing, EKGs, echocardiograms and such, they can diagnose you with a heart attack. And they can even tell you to what degree that heart attack has occurred to an extent. And they can be right about that, 100% right. However, in order to say that one is disabled or that one potentially like you and I might be or in need of a transplant, whatever organ it is, there has to be some extensive testing that takes place, much more extensive than the testing that's been done in an ER or in a shorter hospital stay. And so you're going to have more information there. You don't want your claim denied because when they look into those records and those documents, they say, well, here we see that there's some evidence of this attack. There's some evidence of this inability to work, but we don't have any real solid proof here. Again, maybe you jumped the gun a little early in this. Maybe it's just the fact the doctors haven't gone as far as they needed to. And so I say, from my position, if someone tells you that, it's your duty, your job then to go ahead and start saying, hey, I want second opinions. I want some real evidence of this, because it's not that I want to be out of work anyway. Show me, prove to me what my need is. So you don't want to hear that the information is insufficient. And then here, you don't want to hear that the information is incomplete. Incomplete. Now, what do I mean by that? That is that all the documents have just not been gathered. You know, if you're like I was, I'm a congenital patient. That is, since birth, I had a heart defect. Since birth, I had a form or to some extent, heart failure. And so for 30 some odd years leading up to my transplant, 30 some odd years leading up to my need for Social Security and disability, I had all the records in the world available to prove my case. But what if those records weren't given to Social Security disability? Because again, to be honest with you, they're not out there killing themselves to gather your medical records. And you say, well, wait a minute. I told them all my doctor's names. I told them all the information, the name, address, phone numbers. I gave them the information. I signed the release forms. That does not mean that they're going to have that information. That does not mean that either on the hospital side or the doctor's side or on their side that they've gathered all that information. It may be that all the documents weren't sent to them or weren't sent to them in a timely manner. You know, maybe you applied in this example, by July the 3rd, and they may make a decision by August the 3rd, but all your records weren't there. Or maybe the records were there from some doctors and some facilities, but not from others. And maybe it was the ones that count. Again, if you'll go back and watch that previous program, I'm going to link to in the show notes below. I've already linked to in the video in the corner somewhere up here. Go back and watch that secret to getting disability. That's where I tell you how you get those documents, how you make sure that those documents are on file, how you make absolutely sure that those things are going to be taken care of. Because in the end of this, you've got to force their hand. You don't want to end up having yourself to be denied for Social Security and disability. Again, if you need that because of an inconclusive record, inaccessible information, insufficient information, or an incomplete file because someone dropped the ball. I don't know any other way to help you than that. We'll talk about this on another day from another perspective. But as far as things go today, you need to make sure your history's in order. You need to make sure your claim is valid and legitimate, and make sure you do all you can do to make these things work, because it could be a matter of life or death for you. If this program's helped you in any way, how about go ahead and like, subscribe, and share. But until next time, stay stronger, friends.